My name is Curt Lamansky, so I'm with Pacific Rim Missions International. So let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing. Was born and raised Roman Catholic, got saved when I was 16 years old. Radical transformation from partying every Friday and Saturday night and getting drunk to, the Tuesday I got saved. I went to one more party on a Friday, walked down the hallway, got to the room where the party was, and I asked myself, prompting of the Holy Spirit, brand new in me, what are you doing here? I turned around, went home, and read my Bible, which I only took off the shelf on Sundays. I read my Bible for between 2 to 3 hours, and that about 3 hours that first night, and then that became a pattern. Every Friday and Saturday night, instead of going to parties, I would read my Bible. The Lord radically changed my life. I've witnessed to everybody, most of the time with some tact, sometimes with not, but very much on fire. God called me into the ministry, so I studied for the ministry, ended up God directing our steps to Northland Baptist Bible College. That's in Dunbar, Wisconsin, the North Woods like here, not quite as pretty, but still pretty up there. And we served there. I was a professor for 17 years. I was the dean of the School of Biblical Studies for 12 years. Consecutively, during that 17-year time, I also served as a pastor of 2 churches. One, a real small church like this one, in the North Woods. The other, the Lord used me to church plant and to start a church in a little town called Norway, Michigan. And after the first year, there were about 100 people there, and it was just out of control. Took care of my dad who lived with us. He had late-stage MS, 4 kids, dean teaching, and I was like, Lord, we've got to turn this over. So God led us to another man, and I became his assistant. So anyway, the last 5 years that I was at Northland, the itch to move from the lectern as a teacher to the pulpit full-time as a pastor just kept getting stronger. So each year I'd have about one inquiry or offer from a church to come and be their pastor. And every year I'd go to our president, Matt Olson. I'd say, Matt, what do you think? And he'd always say the same thing. Curt, if this is God's will, we'll help you get there, but we really need you. Please stay. So, I'd stay until that final year, and I had a number of offers, inquiries. I was just like, okay, this is God telling us to move. So we moved to Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and really one of the main reasons we were in Sheboygan is because with my dad, if we would have moved out of state, he would have lost his Badger Care medical help. And to lose that at his state would have just kind of wrecked his life. And if we would have left, and we were willing to leave if it was God's will, and we even inquired on some things and went, took a step or two, but ultimately we stayed in Wisconsin and with my dad. He has since passed. But we were in Sheboygan for 10 years, and 6 years ago, one of my former students, his name is Tim Valiente, both he and his wife were students of mine, calls me up out of the blue, and he's a missionary with Pacific Rim Missions International, and he says, Curt, we are serving in the Philippines, and we're on Negros Island, which is the 4th largest out of 7,000 islands in the Philippines. Massively populated, beautiful place, but huge poverty. So don't think it's like Hawaii. There's no air conditioning. It's not. Everybody lives or almost everybody lives in bamboo houses with a corrugated tin roof or a tarp, literally a tarp stretched over top. So, we're here, and there are over 1,000 Bible or Baptist churches just on the western half of our island. And he doesn't have a count, for how many. I said, well, how many are on the other side? I don't know, but there are a lot over there too. So we're talking over 1,000 churches. These pastors, many of them, over the years have asked and asked and asked, would someone come and start a seminary? They have a 4-year Bible college education, which in a lot of places that's plenty, but there, when they get done with their 4th year, they have the equivalent of what a student at Northland would have had at the end of their freshman year. They still don't really know a lot about homiletics, how to preach, hermeneutics, how to interpret the scripture, theology. There's a lot of fuzzy thinking, and they know that. These pastors know that. They watch people online from America, good pastors, and they're like, how does he do that? Ooh, I wish I do that. They're like, we need a seminary. So Tim calls me up out of the blue, and he says, Curt, we've been prevailed upon. And so Mark Kittrell, who is the president of our board, and Tim Valiente, former student, by the way, I've known Mark for over 30 years, been a friend for a long time. They said, look, we know how to teach, but we don't know anything about how to set up a seminary. We don't know about the administrative side. I mean, you've done the teaching and the administration, and you have a pastor's heart as well. Would you help us get launched? And so I said, of course I would. Well, for 2 weeks then, I worked on scope and sequence. In other words, what courses do they need to have? So I did quite a bit of research. Broke the seminary degree into 3 parts: head, heart, and hand. So all the courses relate to one of those 3 central scriptural ideas. And then we had a 3-way phone call, talked for 2 to 3 hours, and Mark and Tim loved it. They made a couple of minor tweaks and then launched with that. Then COVID struck, and the Philippines was a lot worse than here. You think it was bad here? No, it was way worse there. It was kind of a martial law, and for a year beyond when we got rid of all the stuff and masks and things, they still had it. So anyway, it slowed the seminary significantly. We went from offering 5 classes a year to offering about 2 classes a year only online, and so forth. So the seminary got restarted about 2 years ago. Went back into 5th gear 2 years ago, because it was never closed. But they're like, we really need help. So Mark calls me, says, Curt, you've been helping us now for a while. Would you consider coming on full time with our mission? So anytime that you help a missionary, a little piece of your heart goes there. And, I'd kept in touch and helping them little bit by little bit. And so that was continuing to develop. And I'm just like, Mark, let us pray about it. We did. Maria and I were like, okay, yes, this is God's will. So we told the leadership at our church 18 months before we left the church that we were called to missions and were into transition. So for 6 months, the leadership started working toward the transition. 12 months before we left, we announced, which was last July, the first Sunday in July, I announced to our church that we were leaving to go with Pacific Rim Missions. And, it was a difficult day for me, for them, but they, in spite of the difficulty, they were excited for us because they're like, we could see this. You've been helping missions, going on mission trips every year, so we see it. So then we immediately created a 5-man search team. They found, after going through 8 possible candidates, references and so forth, and actually interviewing some of them, they found the 9th guy at the end of October of last year. Loved him, had him come and preach in January, had him come again in March with his first Sunday in March with his wife and their 4 kids, and he candidated. The next week we voted, and he got a unanimous vote, which is rare. So the Lord, clearly created unity in our church, and especially toward, his name is Pastor Aaron Smith. And so Pastor Aaron came in May. I then began in June, full-time missions, and this is about, I think, the 7th church, maybe 8th church that we have been at. And so my job is two parts: to be the coordinator of education for Pacific Rim Ministries, and then the other part is to be a missions representative. That is, to go to churches, conferences, colleges, and seminaries in America and tell people what God is doing. So we had just a brief time up in the mountains of Negros Island last November. Was taken, and this is me with Pastor June Ogila. He's the man in the hat. He is the pastor of a church, a Baptist church, Maranatha Baptist Church in Bacolod, which is the capital city of the island. That church has about 500 people. And like I said, there are churches, a lot of smaller churches, and there are a lot of larger churches. So we have pastors, I think one pastor in our seminary, they have 900 people in their church. Okay, so 500, 400. And then there are pastors who, there are 15, people in their church. But I'll say more about that in a little bit. All right, we're in the Philippines, but not just there. We're actually in 3 different countries now. We started 6 years ago, with one seminary location in the Philippines. The Philippines is broken up into 3 parts. There's the northern or Luzon region. There's the southern or region that is dominated by the biggest island, Mindanao. And then there's the central region, which is in green there, called the Visayan or central region. Now, that northern region is predominantly Roman Catholic. The southern or light blue region is predominantly Muslim. Okay, so Mindanao, that large light blue island, is a dangerous place even for me to go now. Some parts I can go to, but I've been warned, always travel with Filipino leaders if you're going to go there because of its danger. But then, and not all the islands are pictured, but the further down you go off that screen in those islands, those are actually islands where Muslim extremists train for incursions and all kinds of stuff. If you know the Burnham story, the Georgia, I can't remember her husband's name, who was martyred, but that's where they were captured, or they were captured by people from that area. Okay, the gospel got to the Visayan region. As far as I can tell, I've been doing some research, and there's not a lot of material out there, but as far as I can tell, the first time the gospel got to the Philippines, true, pure gospel. Catholics had been there for 400 years, but the gospel got there in the year 1900. Baptist missionaries landed on the island of Panay. Here's the island we are on, Negros, and then here is Cebu. In 1900, the gospel hits here, and the gospel is a powerful thing. People trusted Christ, many, hundreds of thousands during the 100 years of the 20th century came to Christ on this island. In fact, there is a seminary, Doan Theological Seminary in Iloilo, the capital of Panay, that was started decades ago to help train the pastors on this island. So it wasn't long after 1900, and I don't know the exact year, the gospel crossed over onto the island we're on, Negros. Now there are, just on the western half, there's an active volcano right now, right there, but there's huge mountains in the middle. There are, by the way, communist guerrillas. I can't go up there by myself, or even in certain parts at all. On the western side here, there are over 1,000 like-minded churches just like this one with the same doctrine. The gospel is powerful, and it changed lives, and it still is. Okay, and then the gospel crossed over onto Cebu. These 3 islands, right in the heart of the Philippines, are where the gospel has just proliferated. Churches everywhere. That's not an exaggeration. We started 6 years ago, our mission board, the first seminary on the island. It's on our camp property. Currently, I think we're about in the last week, maybe it's almost the second to the last week of camping season. We'll have 3,000 campers on average per year at this facility that's right on the waterfront on the Sulu Sea. This is probably the nicest building for about 3 to 4 miles drive. Everything else is bamboo hut type thing. All right, so at this location, there are campers right now, and we scholarship for $10. It pays for a full week of camp for unbelievers. So the churches that come to our camp, we encourage them to invite unsaved teenagers to come. And we scholarship them, so about 500 come per year. And right now, the last count I've had, there are slightly over 100 of those unbelieving children, young people, who have made a profession of faith. And they'll go back to their church, or they'll go back to their towns, and the churches and the youth pastors will continue to try to develop what the Lord has started here at our camp. So 6 years ago, the seminary got launched here. There are currently about 20 students here at the seminary, and we have yet to do any advertising. We haven't sent out even the first brochure. We haven't done any blitz in churches, simply because we're still getting our foundation laid, and we couldn't handle too many students here right now. If we had 50 students at this one location, it would just be too many. All right, then we started a seminary location in the north, in the city called Bacolod. This is 600,000 people at night and 1 million people during the day. That many people come into the city for work. All right, so this is at Maranatha Baptist Church. I was the keynote speaker for their missions conference last November. Pastor Juno Gila, I pointed him out earlier. He is on my left there in the light blue shirt, and his wife is with him. A couple other Filipino leaders are with us there in that picture. So this seminary now has about something like 30 full-time students. When I say full-time, that means they're taking 5 classes per year. I know that's not technically full-time, but almost all of these men are already pastors, some of them of very large churches. They can't do more than 5 classes, and some of them maybe can only do, say, 3. All right, there are ladies in here, younger ladies, and they are from the Bible college that is a part of this ministry, and they are allowed to audit some of the classes. This was a class on the book of James. Then we have been asked again and again by a pastor named Marjun Decatoria, who's from Hinobaan, that's how they say it, and pastor of a church there, and he told Mark, our director, he's like, Mark, we have 50 pastors down here, and they desperately need, we need education down here. No one ever comes down here all the way to the southern part, the boot part. It's, Negros is a boot like Italy, but it kicks the other way. And he's just like, would you please consider? So Mark took that under prayer for over a year, and finally, talking with Tim, just said, okay, we've got to do this. We need to help them. So 50 men mostly come out of the mountains, okay, because there aren't very many cities down here, and only one moderately large one. So they come down out of the mountains. These are men whose families survive on a small bit of rice, and for their bread. But then for protein, these pastors hunt snakes. Lots of snakes up in this is tropical, jungle region. So they literally hunt snakes, and they capture them. Some of them are poisonous, and they capture them. They're very good at it, I guess. I'm not going to try. But they capture them, skin them, eat them, and I'm told it's really good. But anyway, this is how they survive. So this is very simple living. Most of them are, jungle kinds of settings, and they come down here for the seminary classes. All of our classes in the Philippines and in India are taught in English. Okay, you may not be aware, some of you probably are, but the Philippines has all kinds of hundreds of languages. So Filipinos can't speak each other's language, but they can all speak or at least understand English, as long as you talk a little more slowly and articulate, your words really well. They can understand your English. Okay. So it gives us a real boost in being able to teach classes here. And then in India, all of our classes there, again, over 600 languages in India. Indians can't speak each other's languages. They're all tribal. And most of the time, the tribes don't like each other, and there's often fights between the tribes. So English is the language that is used across in India for normal communications in business and government and education. So we are able there, and I'll show you that in a minute, but we are able there also to teach in English. The only place where we don't have regular English classes is in Myanmar. More on that in a moment. So Doulos Theological Seminary is in Myanmar. Doulos was started many years ago and it closed. If you're not aware of what's happening, because American media does not cover very much about the rest of the world. If you follow something like BBC News or World News Service or something like that, you'll see a lot more about things like what's going on in Myanmar. But in Myanmar, there's been a civil war. The rebel armies from tribes in the periphery, tribes that don't control the government, which is in the big cities, the government in the big cities that has a national army, and then the tribal rebels have their own army, and the tribal rebels have been taking over parts of Myanmar now for, I think, over 10 years. And they announced last year that they were actually going to enter the city, the largest city in Myanmar, not the capital, but the largest city, Yangon, formerly Rangoon. This is formerly known as Burma. But they entered Yangon within the last 12 months. That's where our seminary location is. So right now, we only have 10 students at the seminary simply because it's very dangerous. For them to be there means that the National Army can come and literally conscript our students immediately, like just take them out of our building, which is there. They can come and just take them out of the building and put them in the Army right now. One of our men, we had 11 students last fall, and one of them went to our seminary in India because he was in danger of being drafted. He would have had to fight against his own family members because he's from the tribes. So, came into the city. It's like our Civil War. It was really brutal in many ways, and not just because of the death and blood, but fighting against your own relatives. It's horrible. And so this is we have stockpiled massive amount of sacks of rice, 50 pounders or 50 kilos, whatever it is, here in the building, because if they even step outside the perimeter fence, which is a really small perimeter, but if they step outside that, they are in danger of being drafted or potentially even being shot. Our national director, who had a doctorate from America, he actually died of COVID, 3 years ago, because he was afraid that if he went to the hospital, he would be shot. So he stayed home and the pneumonia got him, or he stayed here and the pneumonia got him. So really rough. Currently, I can't even travel there. The Lord willing, in the future, we will. And then here's a picture of our students, and yes, some of the men have their traditional, they're like really long kilts, so they are like long dresses. But some of them wear pants and some of them wear the traditional outfits. But there are 11 of the men in this picture. They are younger. There are on-site 4 pastors who help teach those classes, and then we do some online there as well. There, though, it's the local language, so that's not taught in English, so all of our English teaching has to be translated. And then 3 years ago, actually going back even further, but one of the local leaders in the part of India that I have blown up there started talking to our director, Mark Kittrell, about a need for education, both Bible college and seminary location there in that blown up part of India. So you can see India, it's kind of like a triangle or a diamond What a lot of people know is that there's a mixture of Christianity and Hinduism with just a dab of Muslim in the country. Let me give you a little bit more detailed information. In the southern part of India, so about midway, that's all Christian down there. Now, when I say Christian, that's every kind of label of Christianity. So a lot of the people there are not born again. They're Christian, but by name, Catholic or something else, but they don't know the Lord. All right, but there are hundreds, in fact, no, millions of born-again believers in the southern part of India. There are a lot of Bible colleges. I personally know the presidents or directors or deans or whatever of, I think, is it 5 or 4? 4 large colleges, one of them 400 undergrad, I think 200 grad school. I mean, so there's a lot of education, good education going on there. I'm not saying there's no need to start another college anywhere in that southern part, but probably not. People can get there from here, if they want to. But when the British pulled out of India, because they ruled India for a long time, British East India Company ruled it with an iron fist, which is why the Indians hate us. Most of them hate us. They despise the British. They don't like the Americans. They see us, they see Christianity as Hitler's religion. They see Christianity as the British East India Company's religion. And so they really don't like Christianity. So when the British pulled out of India, they wanted to solve the problems of this sub-Asian continent region, and the way they did it was by drawing lines. And so the British created the country of Pakistan, drew the lines between Pakistan and India and other things, and the British was supposed to be all, not quite all, of the Muslims to leave India, and they forced all the Hindus to leave Pakistan. And so you can look it up online and see pictures with millions of Hindus on the northbound lane the northern lane going west to Pakistan, and millions of Hindus with little rickshaws and all kinds of anything they could, they had suitcases and kids and everything packed onto these black and white pictures, and they were heading toward India. So massive upheaval forced by the British right before they pulled out. So the instability and problems are still there. The tribal hatred is very real there. Okay, I mean, there are people in India, there are people in Myanmar. They purposely, when they build their homes, they don't put windows in it so that it will stay dark even during the day. Why? Because a rival tribe may come and attack you, and you can hide in the dark in your house if you're a woman or maybe a little child. You can hide in the dark in your house. I'm not making this up. I have videos on my phone from our national director here showing and explaining in English what's going on in the villages as they're evangelizing. You can see this little sliver of land. Bangladesh is here, Nepal is here, Bhutan is here. 8 of the 10 highest mountains in the world are right there, and one more of them is right here. So this is very mountainous in this area. We have a location right in the neck in Siliguri, and then we have a location right here in Dimapur that affects 2 big tribes, Nagaland, Naga tribe, and the Ao tribe, spelled A-O. So we started, the Lord allowed us, partnering with Indian brothers, to start a Bible college, which in 2 more years will be also a seminary for 2 tribes, the Naga and the Ao, which basically get along. They're mostly Christian. You say, really? Everybody's Hindu, mostly of the rest of this area. How did they become Christians? I don't have time to go into it in detail, just super fast. A missionary went to this region, actually went to India, larger part of India first, and the British East India Company kicked him out. So he went to this region. He was there for about 6 weeks. He was evangelizing, and then the British East India Company found him and kicked him out again. And he went home to Canada, where he was from, Toronto. So he's there about 1920, 1920s or 30s, I think it is. There are several books in a video even on this if you want to follow it more or find out more. But he went there and is there preaching the gospel in the region where we are for 6 weeks. 3 men made a profession of faith. Is their faith really going to hold? Was it even genuine? The only guy with the gospel is forced out 6 weeks after arriving, so he leaves his Bible and then with them, and then he goes home. So he's an old man. Decades later, in his apartment, his wife has died, and he's in this little apartment in the middle of Toronto, and a knock, it raps on the door, and it's a man named Rochunga Pudaiti. So that's multiple biographies on his life. So if you want to look him up, Rochunga knocks on the door, asks to come in, explains that he is the grandson of one of those 3 men that this man led to the Lord, and that there are now, because of this man's 6 weeks in this region, there are now huge amounts of churches in the Naga and Ao region. And he's just like, the man's just breaking down in tears. He thought he was a total failure. Had no idea, no clue that God had been doing this. Rochunga, anyway, Rochunga could have possibly been the Prime Minister of India. That's how badly they wanted him, and he went with the gospel and ministry instead. This man here is named Dr. Tia Longcoomer. Tia is our on-site national director. Tia has a doctorate. Tia finished translating the Bible. Actually, during COVID, he had some more time. He had been working on it for many, many years, but he finished translating the Bible. First Bible, period, for the Ao tribes. He finished that during COVID, and we've raised the funds for 10,000 Bibles. I think most of them are distributed now. Some are still being, but pastors and church workers were the first ones to get a copy, and I don't know, they may all already be distributed, but Pastor Tia has overseen a lot of that. So we started a school here. Those are the dorms. We rent them. They can house a total of 80 men. We do not have women at our Bible college simply because we don't have the funds to do it, and we don't have 2 separate dormitory situations. So it's only men in our school. There are 34 students, or last year at the end of the year, there were 34 students. Some ended up dropping out. But we can only take 20, and we are now having to turn some away because we can only have 20 per year. So they are studying here. There are 3 Indian men who are teaching classes. We were thinking that the students who were coming here, their English would be good enough for me to teach or one of us to teach. I haven't actually taught here yet, but we thought that our English would be good enough, but it's evidently their English isn't good enough, at least for some of the faster talking teachers. We have one English teacher who's doing Greek there, who's doing really well. They love him. But the others they've struggled with. So we've gone exclusively to Indian faculty for the freshman and sophomore years. The juniors have just arrived at our campus this year, and school has just resumed because they start school July 5th, 5th, 6th, that weekend. Into the first week in July. So they've just restarted. We have juniors now. Next year, the Lord willing, we'll have seniors. And once we graduate our first class, then there'll be a seminary started here. And I will then, Lord willing, or about then, be able to start traveling there to teach. Maybe some undergrad, but probably more in the grad school. Finally, there is a 6th location. So 3 in the Philippines, 1 in Myanmar, and 2 in India. Now let's go over here to Siliguri, that little tiny neck. You can see Nepal on one side, Bhutan on the other, Bangladesh to the south. Bhutan is a kingdom. The king and queen are ardently Hindu, hate Christianity. Anytime they even get a whiff of it, they try to stomp it out. In Nepal, if you can be a Christian in Nepalese, but if you are trying to share your faith, you risk a fine you will never be able in your lifetime to repay, and potentially also jail time. So we have at this, and I don't want to call it a full-fledged seminary, it is a teaching site. What the difference is, at one of our seminaries, we want to offer a minimum of 5 classes per year, 2 in the fall, 2 in the spring, 1 in the summer. Here, we just don't have the manpower yet to do 5 classes, so we're offering 1 to 2 classes per year here. And we have no building, so this is where the classes are taught, out in the open air. The man in the light green shirt is a pastor in Siliguri. He is Indian, but he's from the same tribes as Nepal and Bhutan, and he is our on-site leader. And then there are 13 other men who study here. These men are either already living in Nepal or Bhutan or plan to go to one of those 2 countries. They already know the languages. They can live in conditions like these where we can't, and I mean it, like we would die, probably, just trying to survive here. It's so hard. I won't go into all the reasons why, but it's really hard to live there. And all of these men are going to go, 13 of the 14 are going to go into Nepal or Bhutan to plant churches in the mountains. We're talking about anywhere from villages to small cities that are, near the slopes of Mount Everest or K2 or, famous mountains that you know of. That's where they are, and that's where these men are going. Again, they risk imprisonment and fines to preach the gospel there. So the Christianity is very real here in your church in Manistee, but it's a very comfortable, easy Christianity, just like where I'm from in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Here, this is front lines. They walk, they walk half a block, and it's all Hindu, or else, it's really different there. These men are so much more of the Apostle Paul missionary mindset than we are. So what is the Lord going to have us to do? We're raising support. Once we get our support raised, my wife, who unfortunately isn't here, Maria, today, she's not with me, but Maria and I will be traveling, and I do mean traveling a lot. We'll keep our house where we are in Wisconsin as a home base, but for about half of the year, we will be not just on the road, but overseas in one of these locations or elsewhere, doing teaching and then mentoring leaders of the schools and then discipling pastors. So what do I mean by, you know what the teaching is, the block classes that I'll teach. But when I say mentoring the leaders, here's what I mean. All of these schools are partially run by men from India, Myanmar, or the Philippines. What mission leaders have learned over the last 100 years is that if you start a seminary in a foreign country and it's run by Americans, and then eventually 20 years later, 50 years later, whatever, you try to transfer leadership and pull out, you'll give it all over to them, it fails. I was a board member of a college in St. Vincent in the Caribbean, 56 years old, full, dorms full. We transferred, after lots of work, we transferred the leadership over to pastors, a group of, I think, like 12 pastors from the islands down there, closed in 2 years. This is the story again and again. We don't want to make that same mistake. So all of these are run by, or partially run by, the leaders there. And my goal, the goal that's been set for me, is to go, not just teach, and not just disciple pastors, though those things are very crucial. I am to go there and teach the vice president how to veep, teach the dean how to do his work, teach the registrar how to reg. Because they have a title, but they don't really know education. They know how to be a pastor, but not the education part. So that's one of the reasons why Mark and Tim and others really wanted me to come, is because I have 20 years of pastoral experience, 17 of teaching, and 12 is in administration. So we'll be half the year over there doing that, and then the other half of the year we'll be in the States representing our mission board at churches, conferences, colleges, and seminaries. And when I go places and I tell them, 1,000 churches here, about all these churches, and I say, I was at a missions conference last November preaching, and there were 200 Christian workers there. 100 of them were missionaries, and all of those 100 were Filipinos. I met Filipino missionaries to Africa, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, Pakistan. I met one man who gave me the necklace off of his back. It actually has a little sword on the bottom. He is in a remote part of the Philippines, and he is starting a church with a tribe that was headhunting one generation ago. I mean, this is just an example. The church that I preached in, the conference in, they have themselves planted 24 other churches. They currently have 2 more church plants going on, and then they have sent out 12 missionaries in a different church of also about 500, but in a different part of this island. Just out of their church, they have sent 5 couples to the country of Laos, which you and I cannot, other than just a brief visit, we cannot go and stay in. They've started 5 churches there. I'm just telling you, when American churches in the year, and I'm almost done, but American churches in the year 2000, according to Lifeway Research, which is a very conservative Southern Baptist evangelical group, they, in the year 2000, did a survey of something like 358 churches in America, all conservative, and they had a number of questions. One of the questions was, how many people come to your church average Sunday? 2000, the number was 137. 22 years later, in the year 2022, same exact churches, same questions. What was the answer for how many come on Sunday morning? 67. 50% less. Why? Millennials, well, baby boomers, me, Gen X, millennials, then Zoomers or Gen Z. All right, so baby boomers, most of you generation, that generation, 85% of them go to some church of some kind. 85%. My generation, way smaller. Millennials, only 15% of millennials go to any church of any kind. Most of them probably don't have the gospel, even though they're going to church. And then Zoomers even smaller. Christianity in America, the amount of missionaries and missions giving, ratcheting down. In the Philippines, Myanmar, India, China, the Pacific Rim, not just the Pacific Rim, but especially in the Pacific Rim, South Korea, going like this. They haven't surpassed America yet in total number of missionaries, but it wouldn't surprise me if in 20 more years they do. So what do we need to do now? One of the things we need to do is train them. They're begging for it. They need the training. And if we don't train them, who will? Who's going to go there, and train these men? So it is a privilege to be able to serve the Lord in this way. And I am out of time.